Hey, come on. I have an accent, that's a disclaimer.
Okay, but everybody...
And we've been doing that for a long time. So.
Accent, but not. Anyway, nice to be with you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I just kind of, the other disclaimer, I really practiced for a very long time. Anyway, Dr. Maté is a retired physician, public speaker, and international bestseller author. He was published in over 40 languages. His books are, it's interesting because usually a person that is an author, they have a subject. But Gabor wrote The Realm of the Hungry Ghost on addiction, then Hold Your Kids on parenting, Scattered Mind on ADHD, and I always, when I talk with my patients, I have to add another disclaimer that I don't get any profits from advising it's the best book on ADHD that I ever read. When the body says no, that is about the cost of stress. And most recently, the New York Times bestseller, The Myth of Normal. And I met Dr. Maté 11 years ago. He was the keynote speaker at the Alaskan Health Summit. And he was invited by the state. And I remember receiving the email, and you know when you have that moment when you look at the screen and you think there's a typo, and you try to correct it on you, like, no, he's not really coming to Alaska, and being a guest of the state on top of that, because I knew about his work in addiction in Tallahassee, which is in Peru, where he used ayahuasca to treat substance use disorder. So I changed everything, and I came to hear him. And after the talk, I was just waiting. There was a long line of people that wanted him to sign his books. And I didn't like, okay, should I talk to him or not? I don't know. I didn't know then that I can't pronounce his name, but you know, I took a huge risk, and I talked to him, and I said, I'm shocked that you're here and there's a keynote. He said, why? I said, because I know you work from Tallahassee. And he said, okay. And he said, let's go to the corridor. And we went to the corridor, and we had 3.5 minutes conversation that I can safely say changed my life. So little did we know that 11 years later, he's going to be the keynote speaker in the first psychedelic assisted treatment or first plant medicine conference in Anchorage, Alaska. So thank you for being here. It's always an honor.
Thank you.
So in the new book, The Myth of Normal, you have a whole chapter on psychedelics. So how did your experience start? I mean, what led you to be interested and engage in psychedelic assisted treatment?
Well, as a typical medical doctor, I knew nothing about psychedelics, plants, or indigenous medicine. But after I wrote my book on addiction, In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts, which you mentioned, pointing out that addiction is not an inherited disease, but it's a response to trauma. Then everywhere I traveled and I gave a talk about addiction in the book, somebody would ask me, well, Gabor, what do you know about ayahuasca and the healing of addiction? And I'd have to say, honestly, I know nothing. And then people kept asking me, and finally I became kind of frustrated. I said, you know, I've just spent 3 years writing a book, and you ask me about the one thing I don't know anything about. But then somebody said, did you know that you could experience it here in Vancouver, which is where I live in Vancouver, Canada? And so I went to this ceremony led by a Peruvian shaman, and in one night I understood exactly what they were talking about, because I got in touch with my heart, deep love. I got in touch with how afraid I've been of love all my life. I've been running away from it because of my own childhood trauma. The pain that causes, and also that you don't have to keep running because the love is still inside you. Now that's a very succinct and encapsulated version of what happened to me. And it's not like I can tell you, oh boy, that transformed my life, and ever since then I've been loving person. It's not like that. But I did see the possibilities. And so then I decided to start working with the plant, and I began to work leading retreats where I would, I'm not shaman, I don't pour the medicine, but I worked with people who did, who were trained shamanically, and my job was to help people prepare for the ceremony, set their intention, deal with the issues in their lives, and after ceremony, to help integrate their experience, to help them understand the visions or the emotions or the body sensations that occurred for them during the ceremony. And so then I learned a lot, and I did many of those retreats where I led them along with these shamanic people. And then gradually I became interested in the other psychedelics, MDMA, psilocybin, mushroom. I've done a little bit of work with ketamine, not as a healer, but just as a subject, and so that the whole world opened up to me, but it began through that introduction to ayahuasca after my book on addiction. And since then I've, worked with hundreds of people with depression, anxiety, autoimmune disease, addictions, of course, and I see the potential of these medicines to help so many people in the right hands, in the right context, with the right intention, with the right precautions. And we'll be talking about that, I'm sure. But yeah, that's how I got introduced.
So you've been guiding many people. What is the problem? There's a huge hype right now. So I want to talk about the promise and then also the limitations. So what can, in your experience, is the real potential of plant medicine based on your experience?
Yeah. So we're talking about plant medicines, but also human-made medicines like MDMA and so on. Much of human behavior, as I found out, is rooted in unconscious patterns. And these unconscious patterns were programmed into most of us in early childhood, before we had any awareness, actually. It happens already in the womb. The child's emotional states and the state of their brain, including the circuitry of their brain, is significantly affected by the mother's emotional states. And this is not even controversial anymore, it's been shown in many, many studies. Then the birth experience, then the early infancy experience, how well you held or seen and understood or responded to. The emotional states of the parents have a huge impact on the development of the child's brain and on the child's sense of themselves. And then, of course, in a lot of families, there's dysfunction, there's unresolved trauma, parents without meaning to, but they do hurt their children. Sometimes children are abused. And all this gets programmed into the unconscious, and people develop a sense of themselves that's based on their unconscious programming. Now what the psychedelics do is what dreams do. When you dream, it's your unconscious speaking to you. And your unconscious is speaking to you because in the dream state, when you're sleeping, the parts of the brain that carry childhood emotional memories get more blood supply, and of course the conscious rational parts of the brain are offline. So every time you dream, you're basically dreaming some emotional pattern from your childhood along with present experience. But the problem with dreams is you're not conscious, you're not aware, and it's so difficult to remember them, and it's even more difficult to interpret them. Psychedelics give you access to the unconscious, all kinds of emotions that have been hidden because of trauma or wounding childhood experiences, same thing, will arise. You might have visions. All of these visions have meaning, just like all the images in a dream has meaning. But the difference is you're awake, you're present, and you're conscious. Number one. Number two, you're working, unlike when you were a kid and you were emotionally alone and bewildered and had no recourse. Now you're working ideally in a context where you understood and held and supported, and when people are guiding you, accompanying you, supporting you. So you can actually go through these experiences, and sometimes the experiences are beautiful, loving, like I experienced the first time, open-heartedness. People can have beautiful visions sometimes, which reflect their inner reality. I'm not very visual, so I don't get a lot of visions. Or you can have hellish experiences. You can have pain, rage, fear, terror arise. So people talk about bad trips. There is no bad trip. If those emotional states arise, it's because they're in you. And you need to know that they're in you. And you get to witness them. And you get support with them. So there might be very difficult trips, but there's no bad trips if the context is right, if the support is adequate, and if the integration is done properly. Then every experience is a learning experience. Might be difficult, sometimes it's wondrous and joyful, but it's all about learning so that you're not driven by your unconscious, but you gain some awareness, which means that you gain some freedom. So that's the potential. And it's not the only way to get there, but certainly it's the quickest way to get there, is through psychedelics.
So how do you manage people's expectations? Some people have the expectation, I'm going to do that, it's going to be good, or it's going to be bad, but I'm going to be all healed. So how do you deal with that?
I tell people not to have expectations at all, but to have curiosity.
Right.
So don't go in there expecting anything, either good or bad, or if you have expectations, notice them,
Right.
but don't believe them. The expectation is just your hurt little ego trying to hope for something better, and be compassionate towards that, but don't let it dominate your experience because you're going to be disappointed.
How so?
Well, because it may not happen the way you want it. You may not come out of it with a sense of unity and God loves me and I love everybody and I love myself. You may not come out of that at all. You may come out of it with pain and confusion. You may come out of it with memories that you wish you didn't have, but it's all good, it's all learning, it's all teaching. So don't go in there with expectation. Go in there with curiosity. Whatever happens in your body, and the body is very important, or in your mind, be curious about why. Oh, what does this mean? What is this trying to tell me? What is the message here? What is the learning? So drop expectation and develop open-ended, open-minded curiosity.
What are the limitations, the shadow of this work? Dangers.
Well, okay, there's some specific dangers, which is that some people just shouldn't do them. Obviously, people taking certain medications shouldn't do certain substances which interact with those medications and may cause severe side effects, so that has to be very carefully vetted before. People who've had episodes of psychosis or mania, I'd be very reluctant to lead them into ceremony, not because I don't think they could be helped, but they could be, but it may trigger stuff for them, which would then need a holding environment for a long time afterwards. And usually that's not available. In the modern world, people have these experiences and they go back home to their stressful lives, lack of support and so on. So I'd not want somebody with psychosis, severe psychosis history, or mania to be triggered into these states. I'd be very careful about that. So that's a limitation. There's obviously a limitation financially. These ceremonies, unless insurance covers your treatment, and right now the only psychedelic medication that's legally covered by some insurance is ketamine. This is expensive. Not only is it not legal in the United States or Canada, so if you do, a lot of people do it, and the police has got better stuff to do than to try and stop it. But there's no insurance, there's no coverage, it's expensive. That's a limitation for a lot of people. So that's one set of danger. The other set of dangers is or limitations is the competence, experience, and integrity of the providers. People under the influence of psychedelics are very vulnerable. They're really open, which means they can really be exploited. And in the worst case, we've seen examples in the ayahuasca world, in the MDMA world as well, where providers use their power to exploit, sometimes sexually exploit, most commonly sexually exploit clients. Now that happens in the church, as we know. It happens in the medical world, it happens in the psychiatric world, in the psychological world. Anytime somebody has power over somebody else, that's a danger. And the people that go into ceremony, usually they're carry some trauma, so they're vulnerable, and then they open up with the psychedelic. And somebody who lacks integrity may use that power. A less evident danger and less malignant danger is simply that the providers are not strong enough in themselves and are not well trained enough, and they haven't done the work enough with themselves to be fully present, to be powerful in a benign way, to be able to hold the pain that might arise for the participants. And sometimes that can leave the participant very much alone and feeling confused and bereft. So you have to make sure that the provider is adept enough to know what they can do and to know what they can't do. There's no danger if the provider knows their limitations. But if the provider does know their limitations, then when stuff that goes difficult and challenging, they will blame the client for it. To say, this is your problem. So these are some of the dangers.
So how
and I've seen them all.
Yeah, so how would you recommend for people to vet where they're going to do an experience if they're seeking one? I mean, how would you, what would be your advice on that? Because what you're saying basically that a mad provider can harm. So and there's a lot of them. So what is your recommendation about how to vet?
Well, it's a difficult one because most of these modalities are not legal. There's also no legal regulation over their work. And so you can't just go to a college of physicians and say, is this person in good standing, with psychologists and so on. Not that that's a total protection, but it's some protection, I think you have to talk to people that you trust, who've had the experience. You have to really follow your gut feelings. It's quite striking to me how often people will have a gut feeling that this situation is not right for me, but they still stay in it. Now that's a trauma imprint. As we are traumatized as kids, we learn to distrust our gut feelings. And I could talk about why, but we do. Which means that when adults experience a gut feeling, warning them, they don't listen to it. I'm saying, as much as you can, pay attention to your gut feeling. So, ask the right questions, talk to people who have experienced those providers, you can say something about them, and pay attention to your gut feelings.
So, I just want to talk about accessibility and safety. I mean, that's about what we're talking about now. I mean, is there any effort that is being done to increase the safety and accessibility of plant medicine as much as you know?
Well, again, because they're illegal, there are no legal measures to make them safe.
Right.
Now, the illegality itself is completely irrational. I mean, take something like ibogaine, plant that grows in Africa. Maybe some of you have heard about it, maybe somebody's talked about it at your conference. But this is a plant, and I've worked with severe heroin addicts. This is a plant that you do 1 or 2 sessions with it, and even after decades of opiate use, you have no withdrawal symptoms. You have no craving, at least for a while, you know. Nothing like that exists in Western medicine. But in the United States, it's absolutely illegal to even use it or to provide it. So, when it comes to safety, how do you keep people safe when this is irrational illegality? Tammy, I've forgotten quite what your question was, but can you repeat the question? Because I did partly answer it, but not completely.
You totally answered it, but we talked about safety, and the other part of it is accessibility.
Accessibility, yeah. Well, accessibility very much depends on 2 things. One is legality, and the other is financial resources. I mean, if you can afford to travel to Peru, or to Brazil, or even to Mexico, or even in North America, you know, like an Ayahuasca ceremony, I don't know what the current prices would be, but $200-300 for an evening would not be unusual. Maybe sometimes more. Well, not everybody can afford that.
Right.
A lot of people can't. So accessibility is very much a matter of legality, number 1, and of financial resources on the other.
Yeah. I want to move into a cultural aspect of it, and I want to read the quote. I guess it's a very famous quote from your book.
Yeah.
You know which one, right? The white man goes into his church and talk about Jesus, but the Indian goes into the teepee and talk to Jesus. So.
Yeah. That was said by the great Comanche leader, Quanah Parker.
Yeah,
And Quanah Parker was a 19th century, well, he lived into the 20th century actually. He was one of the last great military leaders of the indigenous people. And he fought a very courageous, very brilliant military campaign against the colonial settlers who were taking over his people's lands. Of course, he was actually part Comanche, part white, but he sided with the indigenous people. Of course, he was defeated, as they all were. And it was then that he turned to peyote as a sacrament. And he's the one that made that famous statement about the white man talks to Jesus.
About Jesus.
About Jesus, sorry, and the indigenous people, the Indian, call them, talks with Jesus. What he was talking about is the direct spiritual experience of oneness with truth and the universe. And indigenous people have always, with or without psychedelics, with or without plants, have always respected that, experienced it, and knew it. The so-called civilization has split people off from nature, has split people off from their own nature, and made them forget all the indigenous wisdom. And so this is what Quanah Parker was talking about. And when especially when it comes to plant medicines, it's really important to honor the indigenous traditions, and because that's where they come from. And it wasn't just a bunch of people sitting around taking stuff. It was a whole cultural, spiritual experience. So it's really important to recognize that and as much as possible to honor it.
I have a question about that. I have several questions about that actually. And you talked about honoring the tradition. So what can we do to honor them in modern setting? The settings are different, and afterwards I want to talk about the culture that is different, but how do we honor them in modern civilization when we use them, in how we honor them when we use them, and how we honor them when we talk about them? It's two aspects of it.
Yeah. Well, it is difficult, but there are certainly ways to approach it that are more honoring. One is, as much as possible, do it out of nature, connect with nature, connect with the land, because that's where it comes from. Number one. Number two, if you have an opportunity to work with indigenous shamans or leaders, or even have elders present, if they're open to it, and bring their wisdom, do it. Number three, here in Canada, and I think in the United States as well, it's becoming more and more accepted and even expected that when we have any kind of a public event, we do a land acknowledgement. That here in British Columbia, for example, we're on the land, unceded land of indigenous people. Now it can be a bit of a slogan, an empty kind of slogan. But if you do it with a full heart and say, yeah, let's just recognize that here we're on their land. The land that they looked after for all those thousands of years. And here we are about to enter a ceremony and with a plant that they discovered, that they developed. That's a beginning.
There is also a cultural piece to it. I mean, that's the cultural piece of it, but we're taking plant medicine that came out of a philosophy of life. It's not just plant medicine, and we're using it in Western ways. So I'm gonna, do that and do my process and, in the service of the eye. It's just a different culture. So I'm wondering, how does that translate? Because plant medicine wasn't just something that you take, it's part of a whole way of understanding life, and it seems that is contradicting to values and how we live our life in under the tyranny of the Western mind.
What you're saying here is very important and is very poorly understood. I just finished reading a book, quite a well-known book, came out 40 years ago or so. It's called The Continuum Concept. Continuum Concept. It was written by an American model, a woman, and writer, who, I'm not going to say how, but she ends up in the Venezuelan jungle, 6 weeks away from civilization, living with these Stone Age people. What the book conveys so beautifully is not just that these are human beings like us living under different circumstances, they're human beings living with a completely different mindset. They have a completely different relationship to the world. The plants are their teachers. The animals are their teachers and their friends. How they relate to each other, how they relate to their infants is completely different. They grow up with a completely different sense of themselves, both as strong individuals, but very much part of the community. And that community includes all the plants and the animals and the rivers and the mountains. I mean, you can talk about it in words, and intellectually I can understand it, but I'm not inside that mindset. And it's from that mindset that plant medicines arose. Once I was in Peru, in the jungle, and I asked one of the Shipibo, one of the indigenous people, I said, how did you know about the plants? Because they know everything about the plants. They said, the plants taught us. But to the Western mind, I'm also reading a book now by an indigenous American woman. It's called Braiding Sweetgrass. I don't know if any of you know that book, but it's about the relationship of indigenous people to the plants. And not just psychedelic plants, in fact not psychedelic plants at all, just all plants. So it's a totally different mindset. The Western mindset is all about the ego, how to enhance personal wealth, personal power, personal sense of worth, and how to use and exploit nature to make us bigger and richer. The indigenous mindset is totally different. And even the language is different. So that when you translate indigenous language into English, it's very difficult because they have different concepts. The words mean different. They might have 40 words for something that in English there's one word for. Now in this Amazon jungle, in the book Continuum concept, they don't have a word for work. There's just no word for work. Because they don't perceive of it as work. They talk about, there's a word for cutting the sugar cane, there's a word for cooking, there's a word for digging the earth, but there's no word for work. Because their relationship to it is totally different. And in this book, Braiding Sweetgrass, it's one of the North American indigenous languages that the writer is talking about. They have all these words that in English don't even exist, and those words represent a totally different mindset.
So
at least we have to be aware of that. At least we have to be aware. It's not that we can just jump from one to the other, but don't take your mindset and your culture for granted, as if this is the only way to be in the world and to understand the world and to speak about the world. It isn't.
Yeah, and that's what I'm wondering, if there is a translation, because you go into that world and then you come back into the capitalist, all about me world,
Yeah.
and it's ingrained. I mean, I see it myself, so I cannot complain about others. I mean, it's a difficult, if not impossible, translation.
Well, it's difficult, but wouldn't you say for yourself, even though it's difficult, you have, to some extent, brought some of that back into your regular life? Wouldn't you say that?
Yeah.
Hmm?
Sorry? You're asking if...
I'm asking you if, in your experience, even though it's a difficult transition, were you not able to bring back some concepts and some transformations into your regular life from your plant experiences?
Honestly, in the big scheme of things, I'm more aware and more of how the place I'm living and how I'm living lends itself to disconnection, less than connection. So I'm more aware. I don't think
Okay,
I came up.
which part of you is more aware?
Okay. I will. Can we go back how to say your name?
That's Gabor.
Thank you. No. Which part of me is aware?
Yeah.
Yeah, just the part that is aware. I don't know.
Yeah,
how to
okay.
define it.
Well, the part of you that is connected, that's the part of you that's aware. And so that awareness itself makes you a different person than you were before you were aware.
That's true.
So that means you are living proof that it's possible to bring some of it back.
Okay, so we are in a positive note. So where do you think this whole movement is going to?
Well, I see something both positive and something hazardous about it. On the positive side, for reasons that you and I have discussed, and that many people have experienced, these plant medicines and other psychedelic medicines can help people heal their traumas, find more connection with themselves, develop more awareness, come closer to health, or find health. All this is true. The potential is tremendous. So the concern that I have is, like, when you ask yourself the question, why is it that psychedelics have become so appealing to people and so interesting to people and the subject of so much conversation? It's because of the failure of Western medicine and the failure of Western psychiatry. I mean, as a Western trained physician, I can tell you, there's great medical miracles, of course, and medical advances, of course, which shouldn't be shunned or discounted, they should be celebrated, but at the same time, the mindset of Western medicine is this narrow. It separates the mind from the body, the person from the environment, and all of it from culture and nature. But it's all, scientifically speaking, it's all one. So that, and the psychiatry is particularly limited. Psychiatry is particularly not the fault of individuals. I'm talking about the psychedelic ideology in which they're trained. They see the prevalence of mental illness due to biological problems in the brain and genetic causes, all of which is nonsense. The biology of the brain actually reflects the impact of life experience. So it's that life experience you have to deal with if you're going to heal people, but psychiatry for the most part doesn't. So the more narrower and the more limited the perspective of Western medicine is, the more people want to go to something else that's more holistic and broader and more promising. And psychedelics are. But unfortunately, a lot of people will never access psychedelics. A lot of people will never access psychedelics with really good providers. And we can't put all our eggs into one basket. So I think that for the culture to heal and for the healing modalities to become more expansive and more holistic, we need to go way beyond just psychedelics and transform the whole system. And I think people are putting too much hope in psychedelics, which reflects again the limitations of Western medicine, but it can, I think, take our eyes off the larger picture of how do we transform the whole system, of which psychedelics should be a very important part, but not the whole picture.
Okay, so I want to first, thank you, and I want to raise one question because that conversation that we're having is reflecting that. There's a moment of expansion, and then we go, well, but then those are the limitations. There's expansion, but this is how our healthcares go. So we go, in and out, and as we talked about, the political situation and the fear and what's going on, and feeling often, I can say personally, helpless. How do you keep hope in times where it seems that the door, of hell is opening wide? No, I mean, it's a serious question.
I hear you. I don't talk about hope very much. Hope is a wish and a fantasy that something will happen in the future. I'm not much interested in that. I'm interested in what's possible right now. And so I don't believe in hope, I believe in possibility. I think healing is part of human nature.
Okay.
I think curiosity, seeking, exploring is a part of human nature. I think the truth and the desire for truth is really a part of human nature. It's covered over and it's distorted in all kinds of ways, but it's there. So it's not so much that I'm hoping for something, it's that I believe in those possibilities. In other words, I believe in human beings. And so I think no matter how terrible, look, I was born, as you know, I was born in a very terrible time. And I was almost thrown into an oven as a baby. I mean, I wasn't, but I could have been very easily. So I've seen a lot in this life. I see terrible things happening in the world right now. I'm not going to talk about specific politics, but I see awful things happening in the world right now. Awful things have happened here in North America. But people still keep going. There's still resilience. There's still love. There's still humanity. So I believe in the possibility of what human beings are are capable of achieving. It's not a hope. It's a knowledge that we have that possibility. And that's what keeps me going.
Thank you, and thank you for the love that you bring into the world, and to, I experience personally. And thank you for agreeing to be with us and empowering us in creating a community here in Alaska and do, the next right thing. So thank you so much. It's always an honor.
Thank you.